All right, we're going to get started here on our review for Unit 1 for AP Gov. And the first thing I want to show you guys is where on the website you can find pretty much all the resources you need to review for the AP exam. First of all, the PowerPoint that I'm showing you guys is right here where it says Review PowerPoint. And then the outlines that I'm going to show you are listed here, Unit 1, Review Outline, 2, and so forth and so on. So the first one we're going to look at is going to be Unit 1's outline here. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see. It'll go over everything that you really need to know for each unit and give you some tips and so forth that you might see on the test and so forth. And then the PowerPoint itself, we're going to kind of walk through all that. So first thing we're going to look at is Constitutional Underpinnings, Unit 1. And the goals of the U.S. Constitution. What we need to understand is that the idea of the Constitution was to go in and fix the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. And weaknesses included things such as the fact that Congress didn't have the power to levy taxes. They couldn't coin money. Instead, states could coin money. There wasn't a strong central government. There wasn't the ability to really regulate trade. You couldn't go through the process of amending in any type of reasonable fashion or really getting much of a legislative process accomplished. And so because of that, there were a lot of weaknesses, and Shays Rebellion kind of brings that to light in the fact that a rebellion was brought to light and was created in Massachusetts, and the Congress at the time was not able to really amass an army because it relied on states to volunteer their state armies to assist in the matter. Eventually, Massachusetts was able to handle the situation, but the reality was Shays Rebellion kind of pointed out some of the major flaws within the Articles of Confederation. So the Constitution was created to create a fair system that basically would promote the general welfare and individual freedoms. And so the undertaking that the Founding Fathers really tackled was something that was larger than anyone had ever attempted to accomplish, which was to create something that was a representative government, but it was a limited government. And it was a limited government based on the principles of popular sovereignty and the concepts that we're going to look at moving forward as far as how really the framework of the Constitution works and creates what we have. So a couple of the remedies is going to be the idea of federalism. This is balance between federal authority and state power and the role of the state governments. The federal government now is going to be able to tax. Congress is going to be able to regulate commerce that is trade between states and also between states and foreign nations. So that's interstate commerce. Article 2 will create an executive branch that is going to be responsible for enforcing laws. Article 1 creates the legislative branch, which is going to be responsible for creating laws. And then Article 3 creates the Supreme Court. The lower courts won't be established until we see Congress get involved, and they really create the federal court system as far as jurisdiction and so forth and so on. Supreme Court, though, we'll talk a little bit later with Marbury v. Madison. It takes a little bit of time for the Supreme Court to really identify its purpose and really the role it's going to have within the federal system that we currently have. Other remedies is the national government could coin money. States are going to be represented in the House off of population. In the Senate, it'll be equal. The Senate also, senators will be appointed and selected by state legislatures initially. We'll see that amended later on with the 17th Amendment, but in its early creation, the Senate was appointed by the state legislatures. Bills only need a simple majority in the House and the Senate to then be sent to the President, where the President can either sign the bill or veto the bill. And then 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states are going to be necessary to amend the Constitution. So it's not quite as daunting of a task where you need everyone unanimously to amend the document itself if necessary. So the principles that the Constitution is built on it's kind of what I started talking about a second ago, is limited government, popular sovereignty, separation of powers, checks and balances, and then federalism. So with limited government, it's the concept that you have government, but it isn't capable of completely controlling all aspects of an individual's life. There are checks and balances in place that prevent certain branches of the government from really taking over and controlling the daily lives of its citizens. Popular sovereignty is that concept of power being given by the people through the vote and through their voices. And then the separation of powers, the idea that the executive branch has its role, the legislative branch has its role, judicial branch has its role. And then federalism in general is the concept of where we see that balance between the state government and its role within dealing with its citizens, and the relationship between the state governments and the overall national or federal government in our country. So with that, we're going to talk a second here about the amendment process, because the amendment process is important in the fact that, one, you need to know how it has to happen. 2/3 of the House and also Congress, and then also you have to have a 3/4 of the states and the state legislature signing off on an amendment. There's only been 27 amendments, and we know that the first 10 amendments are the Bill of Rights. You need to be familiar with all the amendments. You can look through your notes and find that easily, but make sure you understand those powers that are granted through the amendment process, because that really defines the role of the federal government in a number of instances moving forward, dealing with the states, as we see with the civil rights amendments and the amendments that are added throughout the years after the Bill of Rights, that establishes that relationship between the federal government and the citizens. And then eventually, using the 14th Amendment and incorporation, we see the Bill of Rights and the other amendments being applied to the states itself with incorporation. So you got to understand that and make sure you know those different things. A couple of other things you want to know is that are informal amendments. For example, the Judiciary Act of 1789 is that first attempt of Congress to go in and create a federal court system. Executive orders or executive actions by the president that can really have an impact on the Constitution and change perhaps how the Constitution is interpreted or the functionality of the Constitution. Judicial review is established in Marbury v. Madison, court case that you need to be familiar with. And then the idea of taking the customary idea of no third term for presidents and then eventually applying it to the actual Constitution with the 22nd Amendment. But up until then, it was an assumed custom that was established by President Washington. All right, so federalism itself. There's a couple of different things within federalism that we need to know, and that's really the roles of the different branches of the government, and then the roles of the national government, and what's delegated or express powers that are given. These are those that are enumerated. They are literally written word for word verbatim in the Constitution to give those powers to Congress. You need to be familiar with that. You can find that on the outline. The implied powers is the idea of establishing the necessary and proper clause. You can find the delegated powers and the express powers, especially given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8. And so you want to make sure you are familiar with some of those powers that are established, including power to tax and so forth. Necessary and proper clause uses the implied powers, which is this idea that just because it's not mentioned in the Constitution doesn't mean it's something that Congress may not need to eventually tackle and deal with. And so as long as it falls under the guidelines of trying to enforce or carry out the jobs of the delegated powers to Congress, then the necessary and proper clause allows Congress to create new institutions that are necessary, such as the National Bank, to carry out its powers that have been enumerated to it. Inherent powers, these are the powers that basically the national government has established, and it's a sovereign power that are authoritative as far as over states. Then there's those concurrent powers where both basically the states and the national governments have those abilities. And then we've talked about the reserve powers, which we see in the 10th Amendment, which is the concept that if it's not mentioned as a power enumerated to the federal government, then it's assumed that it's given to the states. Some examples of reserve powers would be education, elections, and police powers. Although, again, there are some concurrent powers where the national government has established a Department of Education. It's also established a police force with the FBI and so forth. So as times have changed and the way federalism is applied, we see that the powers have changed just a little bit, but still make sure you understand concurrent powers and reserve powers. Then we look at interstate relations, and that's the idea of the full faith and credit clause, where states are required to recognize laws and legal documents of other states. There are privileges and immunities clause, which basically states that states are prohibited from unreasonably discriminating against residents of another state for whatever reason. Extradition, there is the understanding that if a fugitive flees one state, that state, if the governor contacts this other state's governor, that they are obligated to return. And then the interstate compacts, which is this idea that states can work together to try and solve regional problems as it pertains to trade or water issues and things of that sort. So states do have that ability to work out an issue amongst themselves without the federal government having to get involved and clamp down and have an impact on the decision. Then we will look at the national supremacy established with the Supremacy Clause of Article 4. And that idea is the concept of establishing the necessary and proper clause and then using that to assert federal government authority in regards to McCulloch v. Maryland, and that basically the federal government had the right to create a national bank and Maryland didn't have the right to tax that federal institution, which was the national bank. In Gibbons v. Ogden, it's more supremacy in dealing with commerce. Gibbons v. Ogden dealt with interstate commerce, and as an implied power, or I'm sorry, an enumerated power, we know that the federal government has the right to regulate interstate commerce. And then federalism today, we want to know the different types. There's dual, cooperative, and new federalism or devolution. Dual federalism is that layer cake. It's the federalism we really saw established prior to FDR and the New Deal. And then cooperative federalism was that relationship between the national and state. And really, the states really became not dependent, but very much used to receiving assistance and aid and funding and also guidance from the national government. And what we've seen in more recent years under Nixon, Reagan, Bush, even under Clinton, we've seen new federalism or devolution, which includes the idea of giving back power to the states, state powers that had perhaps once been taken away from the states, giving it back to the states that we see during the 70s and 80s and even the 90s with Bush and with Clinton. So I'm going to go here to the Word document. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can kind of see it. Now, I know it's off to the side a little bit, but still, nonetheless, you can kind of get an idea of what I'm looking at. So make sure, for example, when we're looking at the different types of grants that you might see during federalism. That's great. It's like grants and aids. We want to take a look at this. And so with fiscal federalism, we have a grant and aid. Make sure you understand the different types of grants. You have your categorical grants. These are grants that are given to states from the federal government, but they have a specific purpose. And the states must adhere to those guidelines that are established in the categorical grant. You have block grants, which, again, states would prefer because of the fact that it's a block of money that goes to a general purpose. And then you have unfunded mandates. So make sure you understand that the ADA, or the Americans with Disability Act, is a massive unfunded mandate. But all in all, if you take a look at the outline, so that's the end of the PowerPoint there, but if you take a look at the outline, it runs through all these things. Make sure you familiarize yourself with those ideas. And again, go back to the class website, click here on the schedule, and you'll have a list of great vocabulary terms for you to look at to make sure you are familiar with. So you can pull all your vocabulary terms from here. It does have another outline for you to look at, but all those resources are there. They're available on the website. Again, the review outlines that I just had you guys looking at is here at the top of the web page. The review for the PowerPoint for the review is located right here. There's all kinds of different resources here that will help you out in preparing for it. So I'm going to put this up online today. I'm planning on doing another video probably in the next couple days here for Unit 2, and then I'll do 2 videos for Unit 3 because Unit 3 is so large, and then we'll get all the way to 4 and 5. So hopefully by the end of this week, I'll have all these videos uploaded for you guys. So if you have any questions, come by my room, like I said, and be sure you ask questions early before they catch up to you. All right. Well, good luck.